Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Asad Lalji. Welcome to another exciting live session of Avid Online. And for those who are joining us for the first time, a special welcome to you. Please refer to the chat box for more information on Avid Learning and the work that we do. And for those who have been joining us and tuning in throughout the year, we'd like you thank you for staying with us through this journey as we've transitioned online. As we look back on this year, it has certainly been a challenging year for all of us, and yet at Avid, it has brought us tremendous opportunity to innovate for the times and to continue in the work we believe in. Our digital further learning campaign, Avid Online, debuted in April and has moved from strength to strength. And now, entering the ninth month, we've completed over 140 programs. In fact, tonight is the 145th. And we've successfully leveraged the digital medium to do our part to support the creative community and to maintain a continuous dialogue with our audiences. And thank you to our audiences who have been regularly tuning in to our live sessions or pre recorded episodes on YouTube, continuing to engage and learn, and giving truth to our mantra that learning never stops. As 2021 approaches, we endeavor to scale to new heights while continuing to spread the positivity of the arts to uplift, educate, and inspire our community. And this brings me to our evening session. Avid Learning presents Enduring Legacies, Cultural Heritage and Architecture in a Future India, a live discussion to mark the occasion of the publishing of the book Kala, Essays on Contemporary Design Aesthetics, an impressive compendium edited by award-winning interior designer Sunita Kohli. Originally scheduled to be a live program at the Royal Opera House, Mumbai, but times are different now. So tonight marks the digital celebration and a book launch, which has been very well received and has been even reissued in its updated edition. I'd like to give a warm virtual welcome to our speakers, all of whom have contributed or supported to this wonderful publication. Please welcome award-winning interior designer Sunita Kohli, Group Head Business Development, Jaquar Group, Mohit Hajela, architect and founding partner, Morphogenesis, Sonali Rastogi, and His Excellency, the Brazilian ambassador to India and architectural critic, André do Lago. They will be in conversation with author, co-founder, and editor of Live History India, Menon. For more about these very esteemed speakers, please refer to their bios that have been posted in the chat section. Please note the session will last for 75 minutes, followed by a 15-minute Q&A in which Minnie will be taking questions from the audiences. So keep posting them in the Q&A box. On that note, thank you once again for tuning in. Over to you, Minnie, and look forward to a fascinating session.
Thank you, Asad. It's wonderful to be here with a fabulous panel and all our viewers who are joining us. Enduring Legacies is the topic that we're talking about with a special focus on culture and architecture. Now, from my standpoint, when I look at Live History India, we have a fairly large canvas that we look at as we look back on the enduring legacies, right? I mean, 5,000 years and counting. But what really excited me about this conversation was the fact that we're not looking just at the rear view mirror and looking at the past. What we are doing is looking at the future as well and looking at how the present bridges the past with the future. So on that note, let me warmly welcome all of you and the guests. And I'm going to start by talking to Sunita. Sunita, congratulations on Kala. What a fabulous book. And it's really a compendium of a whole host of fabulous thinkers who have come together to look at what they talk about or what their perception of design is in the context of enduring legacies. I'm going to start by asking you about the book. And as I said, it is exciting because it also looks ahead at what we are creating, not just at the past.
I'm delighted to be here, and particularly as this is a celebration of Kala. Why did I choose to name this book Kala? because India's design culture is a unique one. What the Western world refers to as art, craft, architecture, and design, in India, it is evocatively referred to by a singular name, and that is Kala. Therefore, today we celebrate Kala, and I am delighted. And as you said, the contributors are many, and all are distinguished contributors. And the first two essays, one is by Martin Lutchens and Dr. John Goodall. Martin Lutchens being the grandson of Sir Edwin Lutchens, and a very important essay by Ambassador André do Lago, who is a panelist here today. And he wrote on modernity as tradition and Brazilian architecture before and beyond Oscar Niemeyer. There is a seminal essay in the book which is on the discovery of architecture, which I think should be a recommended reading at every school of architecture. Then several art historians like Alka Pandey, Yuta Jain, and historians of textiles like Ritta Chishti, who's brought out a beautiful book on saris. Here, the essay is on khadi. And then Anjana Somani on indigo and its colonial history of slavery, and Neeta Khanna on the intangible culture of fasting and feasting. There were, in this book, there are essays by three Spaniards. Sofia spoke on the genius of Gaudi, and there is also an essay by Spain's most eminent sculptor and another by a Spanish architect who won an architectural award for a very important building in New York. Biljit Titus, who has established the Museum of Transport, spoke about how you custom built these cars. Jaya Jaitley, the well-known authority on Indian crafts, has written about how important it is that craft should be central to India's culture and any dialogue or discussion on it. So there's been Vivek Nanda, who's written on Indian maps, and Kohli on temporary architecture of exhibition spaces, and I wrote on syncretic culture in India's monumental architecture. I would like to now ask Mohit Hajela, who is senior at Jaquar, because Mr. Rajesh Mishra has contributed an article, and he is a sponsor of the book, on branding his product. And they've been so successful that not only are they the most valued brand in what they produce in India, but they're also represented in 53 countries abroad. What are his views on how you can brand India? Mohit.
Thank you, Sunita. It's absolutely a pleasure to be a part of this knowledge session. I think it is said that history of a nation is etched in stones. The Indian subcontinent has inherited tremendous monumental legacy. And needless to say, Indian art, design, and heritage has so much to offer in both the tangible and intangible area. The current generation has to own it up, and cultural heritage is unique and irreplaceable. The responsibility towards preserving it being sacrosanct. Branding such enriched legacy is equally important to showcase to the world what India stands for. Truly a democratic, pluralistic society that values its traditions, heritage, culture, provenance, and pedigree. Jaquar Group and Kala both believe that design is all pervasive and impacts our engagement day in and day out. We celebrate design as an entity, and Kala is a brilliant effort by designer Sunita Kohli and all honored contributors in this direction. We are also happy that this book has come in a year when we are celebrating 60 years of manufacturing excellence in India. And for Jaquar Group, truly an Indian multinational into 51 countries and growing, we take pride in saying, proudly made in India for the world. Kalawan definitely is the beginning, and looking forward to more associations with designer Sunita Kohli in editions to come, with yet another set of talent pool that adorns not only India, but a pool of culturally rich contributors from across the globe. Absolutely a pleasure.
Great, Mohit. Thank you so much for that. Sunita, I'm going to come straight back to you and start the discussion on the enduring legacy. We talk about, India's rich repository of design, history, culture, and, that's visible wherever you go. But I'm going to ask you, through this book, was there a certain common thread of an Indian identity that came through? Because I have a couple of questions on how we are going to chisel out this Indian identity as we look ahead and create an enduring legacy. So I'm going to ask you that. What were the takeaways from this compendium of essays, Sunita, which gives you a sense of that common thread?
There is not one human endeavor which is not palpably and tangibly seen in what is truly a great country. Excuse the chauvinism, but I really do think it is. Because, with our 5,000 years of history, but so it was very easy for me. Kala is but just a slice of that. It's just a sampling. It's an amuse-bouche. And as Mohit was so generously announcing just now about another kala and another kala, I mean, the list can be endless because the contributors are so many that can really substantially add to our knowledge of Indian art, craft, architecture, and design. So it was difficult and at the same time easy because all the contributors are intellectuals. And even somebody like Sonali Rastogi, who was a speaker who spoke on a passion project, the Mughal Nala, could not contribute because she had just come in from London or was leaving for London that evening, just spoke and then left, if I remember correctly, Sonali. So there are several across the country, and in fact, why across the country? I mean, even in this Kala, there are contributors from Spain, from Singapore, from England, and we hope there'll be from many more countries like Brazil, etc. André, you and I will discuss this because we've spoken about what can happen when we have the synergies that happen when two great countries join their hands as far as discussions on kala, and I'm saying kala, I actually mean kala, but on culture are concerned. But to continue with this, there are 3 essays by museologists and art historians, Dr. Shobita Punja and Dr. Deborah Tyagarajan, and by Tasneem Mehta. They have all established museums. But having said that, theirs is a story of a struggle, of what needs to be done and has yet not been done, because we are not a country of museums, and museology is our weak link.
Right. So let me broad base this conversation. Sonali, as a practicing architect who's done some fabulous work, I'm going to ask you, when you look at projects, when you look at legacies, is there an Indian identity that is being chiseled out, crafted as we speak, where you think certain trends, certain ideas are uniquely Indian?
So, my work is based around the notion of sustainability. Sustainability for me, more and more in recent years, has taken a larger role of people that exist. So if I'm working anywhere in this country and I'm creating a project, it cannot be devoid of the people. It cannot be devoid of some kind of a priori knowledge that these people bring, and it cannot be devoid of context. So at the start of my architectural education, I mean, we were taught to study context as the history of India. the styles prevalent in that. But more and more with age, I understand that the community needs to be involved, not just study. And so therefore, I think today it is almost impossible for me to think about it. Never mind what its aspirations are. Let's say its aspiration is to create a global New York identity for itself. For whatever reason. Let's just assume that is the worst case scenario. I still feel that in the act of building the inclusivity of people belonging to that context will naturally align itself with Indian today. And I don't think it should be possible to work in any other way. I just don't think it should be.
Right. So people, you have, of course, a presentation that you'd like to share, and we will come to that. Let me get quick opening comments from everybody, and then come to you, Sonali. Ambassador Lago, I was reading the piece that you wrote in Kala, and I found it extremely fascinating to see how Brazil created its own kind of identity architecture, which was quintessentially a product of looking forward rather than looking back. Give us a sense of that journey that you saw in Brazil.
So, yes, absolutely. Thank you. Brazil is a country that doesn't have the extraordinary legacy that India has of 5,000 years of culture, as Sunita was saying. And Brazil is also the result of a very great mix of people. And by the 50s, this was very, very clear. So I believe that there was a real belief in the modernist ideal of looking ahead and of creating something for the new society that was being created in Brazil. So we didn't want to honor the past. We wanted to invent the image, the identity of a new country. And I believe that when Sunita very kindly invited me to join this project, which I thank her very much, I thought it was a very interesting contrast, because we are both very large developing countries, but with extremely different circumstances regarding the past. But this we can discuss a little more later. But anyway, that's it.
Right. Mohit, you spoke about true. Mohit, you spoke about brand India and the fact that Indian design and Indian companies are really taking it to the global stage, and it's been quite a journey out there. And I think in many senses, a couple of brands have really made it very big. And of course, we also have design studios and design experts who made it big. What are the learnings from the journey that you yourself have gone through?
See, I think having worked across with a wide array of multinationals, having few of them in India, and now part of Jaquar, I think there's something which, when we talk of learning, when we talk of brand India, I think as an entity globally, I am reminded of a wonderful phrase, it comes from a philosopher and says in Urdu. It says, Yano Mr. Ramo, sab mit gaye jahan se. यानो मिस्र रामो सब मिट गए जहां से कुछ बात ही है हम में जो कि हस्ती मिटती नहीं. In fact, if you look at Greece, if you look at Egypt, if you look at Romania, but all said and done, this relates the best to a great Indus Valley civilization and the fact that it has survived with all tremors for centuries. So somewhere down the line, brand India is taking a center stage gradually in the world, being recognized not only for being one of the most stable democracies in large economies, but being celebrated for its core values, ethnicity, tolerance, and balance, always contributing to make a healthy world order which thrives. Now, if we look at our own setup, for Jaquar Group, we see a very, very strong, we are very deeply rooted, See, for us, we truly cherish our core Indian values. We are truly a global Indian multinational, now into 51 countries and growing. But what gives us immense pride is that we are manufacturing from India. We can, in fact, happily say that we are proudly made in India for the world. So I think there is a very strong connect now that the world is recognizing India coming to the center stage. And more importantly, as we talk about these things, it is also to understand, it is also to understand that how we are able to showcase this prowess all across. I think that is exactly where I think I would like to summarize that it has been a lot of learning and I think a long way to go.
Right. Sonali, I want to come back to you and the theme that you spoke about, which is sustainability, and take a bit of what Mohit has spoken also. As we delve into your work, what also stands out is how you have used sustainability and local expertise, local traditional knowledge for the work that you have done. Why don't you take us through the insights that you've gleaned from there?
So, after being 25 years in practice, we have last year coined a term and actually uh, trademarked it. And there's a whole story behind why trademarked. It's called SOUL. SOUL is an acronym for sustainability, optimization, unique, and livability. Okay. So for me, a project has to go through this. And the lens of sustainability and uniqueness actually covers a lot of the topics, right? Because sustainability, social, cultural sustainability, other than energy and financial, it has to be social, culturally sustainable, especially as Sunita referred to 5,000. So the people are also one that embody that learning. It has to sustain social culture. And I've had opportunity of
Is it from her side?
almost anywhere I've built into different towns. And it has almost never failed. Right? I find some languishing artisans, some skilled people who have become home because of the inability for society to absorb this and present in a manner where it is conducive for today's aspect. So it's not conducive for a craftsman of the Taj Mahal to exist today. You won't get 20 years to build it. So helping and recreating and recombining it with modernity, still able to embody all that we do, has now formed the major focus of my work. And therefore I like the acronym because it kind of as well. And I think it's very possible, very, very possible, extremely possible to be one with a global language required. Because at the end of the day, kala is a patron. And not every patron can be in the same mindset as oneself. And one has to recognize it's also a patron's view. And I don't think um, it's justifiable that that one cannot do what one sets out to do because a brief is not. I think every brief has the ability to transform and absorb both patrons' wishes and the Indianness, if I may call it that, of the color that we have. And I think many years ago, this was more 12 years ago, when the World Architecture Festival was kind of a preeminent showcasing of the best of India from around the world. And I was lucky enough to be the first Indian to be recognized there for a particular project. It was actually the most low-cost project that I had ever made. And therefore, and did not have brand vision. The client just wanted it done at that price. That was it. And it got recognized as the best building, learning building of the year globally. And it came up against some great masters, and I was just honored enough to be considered amongst them. People know a win for our country. And therefore, it has become a mission that our kala does not propagate enough because we have come from a culture of doing, not discourse. Our kala is of doing and not discourse. And the age of discourse and communication. And I think in addition to modernizing our ways of incorporating the field, I think it is really important that in our education, discourse, and the ability to communicate with color becomes equally important, and which is why this kind of compilation becomes critical. That Sunita has put together, it becomes absolutely critical. Because I think we fail our people in many ways, not due to lack of belief, but also due to lack of discourse and the lack of creating visibility for it, and the lack. I mean, I have a passion for competing and winning awards, but that passion is not because I want trophies on my shelf. The passion is because winning awards makes it seen around the world, therefore makes it more acceptable, therefore provides more people and more patrons for all those people who have enabled my work with all of these crafts. So it,
Sonali, sorry. Did you have any headphones handy? Because the sound is going in and out. All right. So if you could just come closer to your audio. Yeah. Sorry. And would you also like to use your presentation at this point to Dhwani can drive it?
that's a
Dhwani,
good
drive the
yes.
presentation, please. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
Yes, so there's a quick short presentation of 6 slides, 2 for each of the projects where I have had the good fortune to incorporate local skills, sometimes very simple skills. And if I can have the presentation on, well, till it doesn't come on, I will tell you. And some of them have happened by accident that I have found something very useful and cheaper to use, which has given a certain identity. Could you move on to the next slide? So this was that project that got awarded the best learning building of the year globally. And it was a project built at 1,350 rupees per square foot, all inclusive. Now, this was inspired by all these legacies that you see surrounding this one edition. It was inspired by Jali, Jarukas. It was inspired by Bauli, which is actually the STP water, the treated water that sits at the base of the soil, so that the students can get a cool environment because they inject it. And it's very popular today. There are no reservations about people sitting around fully recycling water. Could you move to the next slide, please? And what this is my chance landing up on a community of potters that were starving and their children had become beggars and they were eating by begging. And these are simple pots, no high level of craft happening to them. Now, these pots were used as insulation. All the beams were reversed and they were used as insulation in the entire project. I managed to reduce without any air conditioning 18 degrees of temperature in the whole building. And therefore, we avoided using air conditioning. Only the teachers used air conditioning in their classroom. The building has no air conditioning. It's still one of the most successful educational buildings even today. I've been told that when choosing which branch to go to study fashion, people use this branch because of the way the building is. And these were pots sourced at 1 rupee per pot, and 120 potters and 60 jolly men found employment for 1.5 years. So this is a simple skill. And now apparently it has other people are doing the same only because it's just so much cheaper. I get 1 rupee a square foot from a pot. If I use synthetic insulation, it's 40 rupees a square foot. So this has been a successful. Could you move to the next slide? Now this is a project very recently finished. It was inspired by the Kansaras of Ahmedabad, we call it parametric architecture. Okay? But they make parametric vessels forever, and which is multiply curving vessels. And this is an entire facade which I needed to be solid because west facing and it's on a road where the temperature is like 68 degrees. So I needed to block this. So inspired by mirror work to give identity, mirror work of Tribal of the region, and Kansaras who made this entire elevation was put together as a combination of state-of-the-art shuttering functionality and because in India we don't manufacture it, otherwise I would have used India, and Kansaras. And if you go to the next slide, this is the end result. So the Bunga workers in touch use the mirror work for identifying their round huts. And this is an identity because the client brief was, I want to an identity. And this is how it was created. And this is the finished building, and these are one of these. This is the company. Now, as we speak, we are getting our COVID vaccine. Okay, let's go next. So this is a project which is 1 year away from completion in Bengal. Now, we involve murti makers and artists who are employed once a year for Durga Puja. We involve them in creating these canvases of art. There are 28 canvases, some of them as tall as 2 feet. And we go to the next slide, please. And this is the work coming up. Now, it was CNC drawn on these large walls because they can't be expected to climb up 14 floors. Otherwise, I would need 40 years, not 20 like that. And so it's a combination of walls. It's their art, which has been, modern techniques have been used to install it, and their polishing. So now, 4 years on, we are all still working on this site, and for another year and a half, they will keep working on it. And these are modern buildings, IT, 5-star hotels, IT offices. So they have become rebuilt and reuseful for architecture. And I think that's my last slide.
Right, Sonali, this is quite interesting because I think, often buildings can be soulless, especially in the urban milieu, and I think you've added a fair bit of life and traditional arts into these buildings. Wonderful work out there. Let me go back to Ambassador Lago. Ambassador Lago, you spoke about how Brazil created its own narrative, and I want you to take us through some of the standout pieces that you would like to talk about and introduce to our viewers, architectural specimens which kind of define the identity and the legacy that Brazil has created.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm a great fan of Mies van der Rohe, and Mies van der Rohe, one of his sentences that I like most is that architecture is the will of an epoch translated into space. So I truly believe that architecture is the strongest legacy of any civilization. And in fact, India is very much the proof of that. I heard the mention to Egypt, to Greece, etc. So I think architecture truly has to reflect what the powerful, and in the case of democracy, is what the people want to be remembered for. And it is in that sense that I believe that all countries in the 21st century have the opportunity of thinking of the image that they want to project in spite of their legacy, in spite of their heritage, but as a modern society. And I think that this is a very interesting exercise. I think that the contemporary architecture does not have to deny heritage, on the opposite. I think heritage makes everything much more sophisticated and interesting, but excessive link to heritage can be complex. So it's a bit in that sense that in a country like Brazil, that is a young country, since it had indigenous culture until the 16th century, but mostly wooden, so it's not like Peru or Mexico that have extraordinary legacies in architecture. So we have what we have today in Brazil that is amazing is that Brazil still has the largest number of population that are still in their original state, because isolated tribes in the world are around 150, and around 100 are in Brazil. So we have succeeded to preserve a kind of architecture that has been repeated for probably thousands of years and that is still being built by the indigenous people. So we have this, we have the colonization, then we have a series of historic periods that reflect the architecture that the powerful of the moment wanted to reflect. Yeah, and so I think I'm convinced that you can analyze any country, its economic history, its political history, based on its architecture. So that's why I think it's a very interesting exercise.
Right. Thank you for that, Ambassador Lago. Let me get Sunita in. Yeah. Do you want to share?
Do you want me to make the presentation?
Yes, please go ahead.
Very well. So my first image is of heritage. This is an 18th century church in Ouro Preto, in Minas Gerais, which was at the time the richest area of Brazil, because that's where the mint found. And by the way, it's the first place in the world where diamonds were found after India, because India used to have the monopoly of diamonds, and Minas Gerais in the 18th century has started the competition. So this is essentially Portuguese colonial architecture, but it is also very much influenced by the architecture of other European countries, depending on the priests that were sent to Brazil. So in this case, you can say that you have some influence of Borromini, you can say there is some influence of Bohemia, but it's all mixed with the Portuguese, and it is the first mix that you can find in Brazil. I believe there is Italian, Bohemian, and Portuguese architecture, Baroque architecture together. Next. But when Brazil decided to build the new capital in 1957, the president was convinced that the country, having received so many immigrants, we have the largest population of Japanese outside of Japan, we have one of the largest population of Germans, obviously of Portuguese and Lebanese and many other immigrants in Brazil. The president thought that we had to look ahead. So this is the presidential residence in Brasilia from 1957, and in which, as you can see, there was an enormous courage to do a presidential palace that was at the same time lightweight, because you see the columns are extremely slim. It was engineering at its best, architecture also at its best, and there were some hints of relation to the heritage, since it is a long horizontal palace with a big terrace in front of it, which was the traditional farmhouse from the Portuguese in Brazil. Next. If the presidential palace was obviously very important, even more important in this new capital was the parliament. And as you can see here, what Oscar Niemeyer, the architect of most of the buildings of Brasilia, tried is to do an architecture that would be very easily assimilated by people. An interesting critic says that even a child can draw a Niemeyer building. So these buildings became the new symbols of Brazil that anybody can draw and that have instant recognition. When we're talking about brand, you see this building and everywhere in the world, everybody knows it's Brasilia. And this is a very difficult thing to do in modern architecture without falling into funny forms. So in this case, the sculptural option of Niemeyer was also highly symbolic, because the parliament was put in the very center of the plan that Lúcio Costa designed. So the parliament had to be really the center of the capital. So it was the will of the people. And on the right, you can see the Lok Sabha, our for the House of Representatives, that symbolically is open to the sky, is open to everybody. And on the left, you have the Rajya Sabha, which is the Senate, which is more closed and smaller symbolic construction. So inside these two plates, you have the rooms, the meeting rooms, and the tower, which is the only tower in all the central area that is a government area, are the offices of the members of parliament, also in a high symbolism that the only building that has more than 4 floors in all the old part, in all the tradition, the symbolic part of the city, is the parliament. So the parliament can be seen from far away, a bit like the towers in Italian cities. As you know, you always have a tower, be it in Florence or in other cities or in Siena, the tower that relates to the faraway vision, and then the closer you get, the more surprises you get in this building. So I wanted to mention these buildings because of the idea of identity in the sense that everybody is Brazilian. This is a new architecture. Nobody is more Brazilian than anybody else. It's not the Portuguese legacy. It's not the indigenous legacy. It's a new legacy that is invented. That's why I always say that in Brazil, tradition is modernism. So our tradition is a new tradition born of the modern thinking, which includes obviously democracy and religious and social diversity. So I think it really succeeded to become like a landmark of the country.
Right. Thanks, Ambassador Lago. What I found also interesting was the fact that this was a concerted attempt to create an identity. It was a strategic resolve to create a new identity, which is really interesting because there were minds that came together and said, okay, now how do we plan the future? How do we plan our national identity, which is very interesting. Now, we've spoken about architecture and enduring legacies in 2 constructs right now. First, as the continuance of tradition into modernity and into the future. And the second is as a potent symbol of identity and the vision of a country. But you know, one of the things that is often spoken about is that architecture and people like you all and me, we always look back for inspiration, and very often enduring architecture is architecture, or enduring legacies are legacies which embrace people, embrace the problems and the challenges of the present day and age. We live in tough times, and I'm going to ask each one of the panelists this question in different kind of dimensions. I'm going to start with you, Sunita, because you know, in your interview in Color, you had made a very interesting point that India has 5,000 years of tradition and legacy, and then you had this 200 years of an interregnum when you had a colonial kind of imposition of ideas and design frameworks. And right now, you know, I feel that we are a little confused. You know, a lot of the traditional was also very, very tuned into the needs of local environments, of people, of communities, and that's what I think made it enduring. What are your thoughts on this? How important is embracing people and communities in creating these enduring legacies? I'll start with you, Sunita.
I think that should be where all architectural planning should begin, is the importance that is given to the community and to public spaces. And if we take an example of where most of us are sitting, which is in New Delhi, when New Delhi was planned, the city was planned, after all, the hexagonal planning of this city is taken from Mughal geometry, it can be said. And even though some people then, because it went through many discussions as what the form of this city was going to be, because I'm just going to give this one brief example because, the British, the colonialists, had very quickly realized by looking at all these great Mughal monuments, which are totally assimilative. Therefore, Islamic architecture in India cannot be compared to Islamic architecture anywhere in the world because we are such a deeply assimilative culture and society. So to say, or to say that this is Islamic, you can't say it because, as I said, it has strains of so many other local influences. But take one building, which is the presidential palace, then called Viceroy House, now called Rashtrapati Bhavan. There were many in England who had wanted a building of pure classicism, which was rejected by the architect. He said, because you cannot represent India through and I'm quoting him, through the sterile classicism of the purely English style. So he rejected that. He also rejected the then viceroy who wanted it as a Mughal building, and to which, of course, Lachin said that he was not, because he wanted a rounded arch. And there are two things he said about it. He said that God did not make the rainbow pointed just to show his Eastern sympathies. And of course, he being a classical architect, he understood he had to do something totally different when it actually came down to designing in India and laying out the city. Now, there are two things what I want to point out. Delhi has very important public spaces, which are part of the city planning of Delhi, and which is what is under discussion and all that widely today. Secondly, when you look at Rashtrapati Bhavan, even though he has a rounded arch, and even though, because he said you cannot ask, what did he say? He said you cannot ask Shakespeare to write an ode in Chaucerian meter. He's been selected, but you can't ask him to unlearn everything. But what eventually emerged in this one building, the largest palace built in the world with its 360 rooms and loggias, is that it was designed as a single entity with no afterthoughts and with no appendages. Then the other thing was that what is he incorporated into this building are the chhajjas, the chhatris, the color he took from the Mughals, because of course from the Mughals he realized that the most important thing for them, for power to be understood, was through their architecture. So these are intangible things he incorporated. And of course, most importantly, what he designed was a sixth order to the five of Western architecture, which is the Delhi order. So when we say that how an architect, a colonial architect, eventually what he did, because earlier there had only been copies that were being done by engineers who would be copying what was happening in England. But therefore, Rashtrapati Bhavan is totally unique. And the plan, although based on Washington and on Versailles, is actually unique to India as to what was it pointing out to? I mean, what were its axial points? Purana Kila on one end, the Jama Masjid on the other end. So this amalgamation of Hindu, Muslim, British is really, I think, to be celebrated in what is now already 100 years old. So now it's a cultural legacy which needs to be preserved. But the way forward is what, say, Sonali is speaking about, or what André is speaking about, is that can move forward, but it has to move forward with the best people being appointed for tasks like this.
Right. And of course, the dome of Rashtrapati Bhavan is also inspired by the Sanchi Stupa, which is also a fascinating thing and just brings together all of that. Now, Mohit, let me come to you on this before I get to Sonali and Ambassador Lago. One of the issues is that we deal with modern day problems. There is problems in terms of space, in terms of public infrastructure, in terms of water. Water is the biggest crisis. And look at the country that we are living in. I mean, every part of India, when we travel into the interiors, every medieval ancient city had fantastic water ducting systems, baulis. These were in themselves fabulous examples of aesthetics, practicality, and cultural legacies, really. And we somehow seem to have just completely shed that part, you see. And that is also troubling because today modern science is talking about a lot of the concepts that traditionally we spoke about, and we kind of was ingrained in the very identity of our cities and our communities.
Can't agree more with you, Minnie. I think this is something wherein we are losing track. I think the monumental legacy we carry, the kind of inspirations that we draw from heritage building, heritage structures, I think the kind of technologies that were patronized at point in time, even till date, if you look at those Baulis, if you look at Fatehpur Sikri, you look at Amer Fort, I mean, the way the water bodies were being used, there was practically no air conditioning that point in time. But there was a much, I should say, grown understanding, a civic sense of understanding, a sense of community living, that how we could optimize our resources. Most of these forts and palaces, I'm sure one will reckon with it, with Sunita being there, that there was a very strong understanding that the local material was being used in the radius of just about 50 kilometers. I think there was a lot of localization. There was a lot of local craftsmanship. There was always, we always valued our resources much better. They are not there to last, infinitesimally. I mean, we have to be very careful how we try to draw inspiration from these buildings and how we can best integrate to modern style living. I think somewhere down the line, it is drawing inspiration rightly and picking up the best from there and then see that how we can incubate it to modern day lifestyle living. I mean, the buildings need to be, they can be contemporary, but yet you can adopt the best technologies there. I mean,
Right.
it is a perfect blend. See, technology being an enabler is always good.
I think we have a problem with the audio over there, but if I can just go across to Sonali, if you're with us, Sonali.
Yes,
Um, yeah, yes, so Mohit made an interesting point about what we are losing out, but I'd like to ask you a different question. I live in Mumbai, and I can't get over how the skyline of Mumbai is full of these massive buildings with glass exteriors, which would do fantastically well in a European city, but not too good in a tropical city like Mumbai. When we are looking at modernity, expansion, urban spread, we are looking at styles which are coming in from elsewhere. I don't know how close it is in terms of linkage to India's environment, India's climatic conditions. What are your views on this? Because traditionally there was a lot of sense in the way buildings was made, of course, but the problem then was that you didn't have to do it in scale like you're doing today. What is the meeting ground between the ability to build big and yet build with a sense of the environment that you're in?
So, yes, this is quite a common topic of concern. I have to tell you that I think that the context of who the Indian has changed. We are as much a global Indian as we are an Indian who is a continuity from the past. And if that is not addressed, then we will get a failure of architecture. So if there is a requirement, because we are part of a global chain of things, if there's a requirement to put people at 80 square feet per person and put 2,000 people in a building, then that is a requirement. And to say that a high rise and a large skyline is not acceptable because we've never had it before, to me is not the right approach. To me, to understand that you live by the ocean, but you will not allow use of glass because traditionally we never use glass in that way, is also not the correct notion.
Sure.
So the aspiration is to see the sea if you live by the sea, and therefore you do need the glasses. But there is also a way to understand how the sun moves in the sky. There is also the ability to understand building science through physics, that what are thermal lags, where do you need solidity, and where can you provide glass. For example, my home, I believe in sustainability. It's in my soul. My home in the entire north side facing is glass top to bottom, and I live one with the trees outside it. I live one with it. Okay, now if I have glass in the north, it's beautiful. It's right for this country. It's right for the context. Our context is not just people, which I hugely propagate people. It's also the sun. The sun, the rain, the wind, the temperature is the context of the place above everything else. And even an ancient text, even the Vastu Shastra, which, I mean, I'm not going to talk about how it is used today as a myth, but it is a book of science.
Yeah.
If you were to build a high-rise building following Vastu Shastra, which says that put your core on the west because that will block the heat, of the two towers, put the southern one higher because it will cast a shadow on the northern one. It is the way to understand how the sun moves, and you can build anything. I mean, why would an architect have to be limited by build low, build this, build that? No. Every brief with it brings the intellectual ability to understand the environment and respond accordingly.
Mini?
Right. Yes, yes,
I agree with Sonali because I think that we have to remember that modern architecture, contemporary architecture, is not a style. It is a much more complex thing. It is a complete change, and it is a necessity, in fact. And it is a necessity due to urbanization, to the growth of population, etc. So sometimes we have some romantic ideas about the past and how the houses were made. There is a big discussion in Brazil about that too. But the fact is that we have to house billions of people now in the world, and we have to find solutions for that. So modern architecture is about solutions. I come from a tropical country also, but parts of my country are not tropical, like the case of India. So I believe that what modern architecture gives is many options, and the architects have to choose among the many options that are in front of him. And glass can be extremely appropriate in a tropical place also. And technology is very important also that we have to take into consideration. And by the way, one of the reasons why modern architecture became successful is because the technology for building new buildings allowed to do cheaper and more quickly. So I believe that we have to think of it as an enormous menu of solutions according to the different challenge that you have in front of you. But I want also to say that I totally agree with Sunita that the great thing about Latins, the first great thing about Latins is that he didn't want to do Indo-Saracenic. I think Indo-Saracenic is one of those Victorian styles that was exactly the misunderstanding of modernity. You had modern structures, and you had this decoration that was an adaptation of old styles into buildings that obviously you cannot have a Greek train station, because at the times of the Greeks there were no train station, but they insisted in having a train station in Greek style or a high-rise in Gothic style. All these mistakes that were made in the late 19th century and early 20th century were fortunately overcome by good modern architecture and good contemporary architecture that I believe that had very coherent ways of dealing with this specific problem. And that's what's exciting about architecture. is that the building is right for the specific place, for the specific program, and for the specific client also.
Right. Just to clarify that Mumbaikars love their Indo-Saracenic buildings at Lago. So we will have to have a separate discussion on that. We've got some very, very beautiful examples of that mishmash that you talk about, but that has become essentially Mumbai. But my question more was not on the practicality. Of course, you need big buildings, but really the logic of using some of the material that is used, because what also happens is these buildings become furnaces in the heat, and they require a lot of resources to kind of cool down. But let's move to the public space aspect of architecture and legacies, because a lot of modern buildings are about keeping out people, and especially in India, I think what we really need are places which embrace people, because there are so little public spaces left in this country. And I think that's a real challenge. Sunita, let's talk about museums. Some museums have done a good job about that, but museums could really become the repository of that public space and fill the gap, because they can become such vibrant centers of interaction, of learning, of really enjoying the aesthetics. And there are some museums which are doing a very good job. What are your thoughts on this?
When I speak about public spaces, Mini, my mind would not automatically go to museums. When I speak of public spaces, I speak of public spaces for a population across the board. So to me, that is a public space. Yes, a museum is also a public space, but a person who will go to a museum has to have some modicum of education, or an education, or for small children, educational institutions who are driving them towards it. So to speak about museums, I would say that, because the whole country is a museum, and we've never believed in creating spaces earlier. Now, of course, things have changed for the past almost 100 years, but where we would have repositories of the old, because the old sometimes was venerated in India, and sometimes it was also, it's part of our culture that, for instance, we venerated an idol in a temple. But if a smaller version of that was in our home, it might be 300 years old. But if some arm or limb from that idol broke, then it was considered impure to have it in one's own personal temple space. So, Visarjan was done. Visarjan means an immersion in water, a sacred immersion in water. So, this is India by and large. So when we have, what is very good to note is that apart from central museums and state museums, say a state like Madhya Pradesh has the first tribal museum in India, and the only one as far as I know, and it has been brilliantly designed. So there are also designers, there are also designers, yes, and there are also patrons who are putting together personal museums. There is, for instance, the Museum of Art and Photography in Bangalore, which is under completion. What in Delhi, O.P. Jain has done with Sanskriti, what Lekha Podar has done, and they're across the board. What, in fact, people like, who also is a contributor to Kala, what Dr. Debbie Tyagarajan, when she put together Dakshin Chitra, there's not another Dakshin Chitra in India, because this is a series of museums all housed in old domestic buildings. I think there should be a northern Chitra, similarly in the north, in the east, and the west. So there are people who've done yeoman service towards setting up of museums. But to come back to what I said, to me, a museum is a public space, but not as a public space when you speak about when in urban planning you are designing urban spaces?
I wish it was, Sunita, because I really believe that we need to make museums democratic. We need to make sure that everybody is comfortable and keen, and it's not close to all. And I want to get Ambassador Lago here because in the West, there is, and Brazil is a great example because I've been reading about it, about how there are smaller site museums which play an important role within the community. It's not just a cold showcase of the legacy or the history, but really a wonderfully vibrant place of interactivity and fun. And we have some of those museums in India, and the Bihar Museum is a fabulous example because when I went there, I saw a whole bunch. On a weekday morning, it was packed with students experimenting, doing all sorts of fun things, which is so nice to see. Ambassador Lagos, what is your take on how museums can become these public spaces where people can also be exposed to legacies, to ideas, and also bring out the creativity in people?
It's for me, the question?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, Ambassador.
Look, I believe this is an extremely important discussion because we have to admit that the museums are very much seen by many people as simply a place where things are being stored. And I believe that there is a completely new concept of museum that has to include many functions. One of them is obviously the preservation of the beautiful things that the country has, but it has to have also a space for temporary exhibitions and also attractive spaces for every day. Why would you go every day to a museum if there is not a variety of activities that are either inside the museum or linked to the museum? And I would like to stress one building that, by the way, there is a photograph in the book, which is the São Paulo Museum, that is a suspended museum. And the space under the museum is an open space, is a public space where you have even circus, you have all kinds of activities that vary all the time. And so you bring the person, and the person sometimes can go to the museum. I have to tell you that I was very impressed by the Patna Museum, which is a project by a Japanese architect, but extraordinarily well designed, extraordinarily well built, and with a wonderful collection. And it reminded me that India has the most difficult thing regarding museums. India has very comfortably, which are the collections and the culture. I mean, you have everything that is more expensive in a museum. And what is missing is somehow a building that shows this extraordinary heritage in an attractive way, and also in a way that makes people understand the history and value the collection. So I believe that India, although the museums in India are still progressing, as Sunita said, it's not one of the central characteristics of India today. But the fact is that you have the most difficult part, which is really the collections and obviously the real culture, and how to translate that to people. I believe that is something that can be done if there is a will to do these museums in different parts of the country.
Right. It is really a problem of plenty, I think, Ambassador Lago, because we have so much of it, and that's the attempt that we are doing in Live History India, to tell the stories of our historic places, sites, and our objects, because that's through that you can actually understand history. Let's take a couple of questions now from the audience members.
Can I just add, if I may, with your permission?
Yes.
Just add to one thing, that now it is mandated as soon as a monument is declared a World Heritage Site. So in India, we are 30 plus if we don't count the the natural sites. Now it is mandated that there has to be a site museum. Now to have a superb site museum, there isn't one across, I've been to every single site. Now to have a superb one, why can't we have an architectural competition and
Yeah.
then have a jury to select? You see, even
No,
these small museums, why should
they,
be somebody's, uncle know somebody's nephew or somebody's thing? And, as Sonali said, people like Sonali love competitions. I mean, she's also an architect at the top of her game. There are several others like that. So why not have competitions
So, Sunita,
and get the best?
Sunita, these competitions do happen. Almost all of them are mandated that they are because all the monuments come under the purview of the government, and whether state or center, it doesn't matter. And it's mandated that there has to be a competition. These competitions do happen. But the problem is the structure of governance in which they happen. That's the problem. It's so on paper, what you are suggesting exists, but the way the competition happens, how it is awarded, which is the authority, who is the jury. We had a very eminent jury pool for choosing our parliament. I mean, and look what we have. So
Right.
and that's what I mean. That's bringing to fore the problem. But we have excellent systems in place. But what is that jury pool? The jury pool consists of 5 of the same officers who are involved in the department that floated the competition any which way.
So
Right.
to deal with that, Sonali, like for the Indira Gandhi building, there was an international competition, limited, but it was international with an international jury. There were very few Indians involved in it, and then Ralph Lerner was selected.
But that is no longer the process. The process has
I'm
become
saying the process has been subverted into something
yes.
else, which is
Because
so I think at the end
discipline.
of it, Sunita and Sonali, I think the issue is with the will and the intent to make change happen.
exactly.
I
You're
think
saying that.
we've been doing a lot of discussions on the state of our museums, and the sense one gets is that we still have an attitude of gatekeepers to our cultural legacies.
Exactly.
Unless that changes, where we say it's not gatekeepers, but we are really custodians of our legacy, and that needs to be shared, that needs to be made exciting and embrace the younger generation. Look at what the British Museum does. They have a serpentine line going miles just for an entry into the museum because it's such a vibrant space. I think what we really need is a big rethink in every aspect of the site museum. Some of them are so horrible, Sunita, that I mean, it's a joke. But let's get to some of the questions because we've got about 15 minutes, and I think Ambassador Lago has to leave us a little early. There are a couple of questions, and I'm going to rapidly ask them. The first one is from Neeta Khanna to Sunita. Sunita, her question is, how has your own design sensibility been shaped by and continues to be informed and infused by the complex, tangible and intangible cultural heritage of India? How is it reflected in some of your current work? It's a big question because I know you are so rooted.
I thank Neeta Khanna for it. But the fact is that all my life, design is all pervasive. We are all influenced by design. Some of us become influencers to whatever extent, good, bad, or indifferent. But really, it is one's whole life's journey which makes us into the designers that we are today. I mean, what can I say? I studied Hindustani classical music. I have a BA in it. That also is part of my design sensibility. The fact that I have an incomplete PhD on Christopher Marlowe, and that English, that study of literature is also part of my design sensibility. So each one of us is influenced differently, but influenced we are. And I think all that one can say is really the if you open your mind to the world, I think that's what makes has taken me where it has.
Fair enough. Let's get Ambassador Lago, and we have a question for you from Nuzat Sultan, who says, do Brazilian architects incorporate any indigenous elements or only historical European elements or modernism? Is there any recognition of the indigenous in Brazil?
I'm very happy with this question because, yes, absolutely. One of the very interesting things of the arrival of modernism in Brazil, and that's why I say it's not a style, is that modernism decided to value the heritage, not only of the colonial period, but also the indigenous. So most Brazilian brilliant modernists incorporated many, many elements of indigenous architecture. And today, I think it is very, very much alive and very much in the way that Brazilians recognize a Brazilian house, some elements that are very indigenous. And I would like to call the attention to a magnificent school that was built in the Amazon region in Tocantins. And this school won the award of the Royal Institute of British Architects as the best building in the world 3 years ago. And this school in Tocantins absorbs in a brilliant and contemporary way many lessons of indigenous architecture. So yes, absolutely, indigenous architecture is extremely present in Brazilian modern and contemporary architecture.
Right. Let me get Sonali in this question. Sonali, should not the concept, this has come from Rupendra Guha Mazumdar, should not the concept of color be introduced more comprehensively and critically into school and college curriculum in India so that the youth may be given valuable perspectives of life in the great land they inhabit? Now, this is a very, very valid question. Do architecture schools cover a lot of this? What needs to be done to get the idea of color ingrained at a very young stage?
I think the field of design, architecture, what I studied, is so wide, is so large that whilst it looks like it's a very long period of education, it really isn't. And yes, the simple answer is yes, it should be introduced. But I think of the 9 years of education of different types in architecture that I did, I consider my time at the Architectural Association London the most valuable, because and that was a school that you went to study, but you never ever designed a building. So I mean, people would say, what are you designing? What project are you working on? And I never designed a building in my 3.5 years there. I think it gave me the ability to learn and learn from my environment, learn from my exposure. I know that I will be changed in some way after this presentations today from such eminent learned people. I think what an architectural school needs to do is to give you the ability to understand and learn from your context, from people you meet, from the world you travel in, to see, to observe, and to connect the dots in your head in an inclusive way. And going back to the topic of inclusiveness of color, I mean, if the color card does not endure, then there is no enduring legacy of color at all, right? So and I mean, I'll tell you, my latest learning came from the horrific images of reverse migration. And from my knowing that most of my sites are still partially functioning around India because those people have not returned, who were rendered homeless in 5 minutes of a TV announcement. And my projects are not getting built today in the way they should be. So my learning is to try and wherever I work, give people employment somewhere there and to get something local from there going in that project, even if it is a glass building for a corporate, right? Even if it is that. So for me, from today's discussion, what I take away is that presence of the past and promise of the future can absolutely coexist and should coexist going forward. I think what a college needs to teach is not a topic, but a way of thinking, a way of
Absolutely.
responding to life.
And that is across the field. It's
Very
as
good.
much for history students, Sonali, as it is for architecture students, because I think what we really need to know is how to open your mind and really learn and contextualize and correlate, and that really makes it huge. I'm going to ask Sunita the same question that was asked to Sonali about incorporating color as a concept, and also add the dimension of local practices, because even when you talk about any field, you must get a context of the locality and the location and the local community that you're working in, and that regional context is often lost. But I'm going to add another question to you, Sunita, because Rishabh Sachin has said, Sunita ma'am, I loved your ideas, but what path-breaking changes does the Ministry of Culture need from your perspective, or should private foundations and NGOs be the custodians to move, the enduring legacy of culture ahead?
Well, I always believe that the best results are really when from public-private partnerships. It's just not a term. It's something that should really be followed, adhered to, whether one is going to conserve an important building. And I think the first experiment in this was Humayun's tomb, which was spearheaded by a small group of us. We set everything in place, but it was very difficult because to get government to let go of control, in this case ASI, the building belongs to them. We are just facilitators. So that is a huge discussion on its own. Secondly, what you said, I think nobody can advise the government because they are the masters. So amongst private practitioners, private discussion, we must move the narrative forward and bring it to some sort of, to see that voices are heard for whatever it is worth. But I think that to keep silent is complicit. If you keep silent on, if you think that there are wrongs that are being dealt out to as far as our own heritage is concerned, because I, for one, am a great believer. Spoke about Rashtrapati Bhavan. I think it's a building that belongs to the people. So the president of the country might be the custodian, or I don't mean to sound disrespectful, I'm not talking about present, all president. They are actually tenants which have been put by the people of India. So you look after the building because the building as such belongs to the nation. So it is very important that the government is a custodian for the people of India. This is what I think public buildings are all about. Minnie, I've forgotten what was the first question you were asking me.
It was incorporating color really into architecture school, and really getting.
Having been chairperson of the School of Planning and Architecture in Bhopal, I was kind of, and this was one of the two new schools of architecture that was being declared a National Institute of Excellence. I was, but that's the way they were carrying on. I was kind of distressed to see that not enough importance is given to the teaching of history and the humanities.
Yeah.
It was cursory. So this is what I had brought about, this sort of slow change towards it. But of course, close to 3 years is nowhere near where you can bring about change, and for getting people like, say, whoever is on the panel today, to build a knowledge base so that practitioners particularly and intellectuals came and spoke to students, because students are wonderful material. But what is it that they're going to be taught? So therein lies what happens. And if I think but not just schools of architecture, I think the teaching of Kala has to begin from primary level of schooling. to let.
And those goals, really, Sunita. I think at the end of the day, we need to appreciate, understand, and really share this idea of our legacy, because we also have a tendency to leave everything to schools. But I think homes, parents, I think every individual rooted in India has to understand this, and that's really a big endeavor from us. But I'm going to wrap up this
Right.
discussion. I'm going to wrap up this discussion with some fun questions, really, because we are living in such a challenging time. As Asad said, I mean, we would have been at the Opera House enjoying a lovely
I
evening.
know, I know.
Instead, we are on Zoom calls, but it's fine because we get to interact with all fabulous people. But I'm going to end by asking you two parts. Part A, what do you think is an example of an enduring legacy? And on a lighter note, what would be the enduring legacy of the year that we are going to say goodbye to? And I hope that next year is going to be better. In this COVID pandemic year, what could be the marker of this year, you think?
Are you asking me the question?
Yes, I'll start with you, Sunita.
Okay. So I think the enduring legacy of 2020 will be that, at least for me, because I'm technologically challenged, but even the fact that I'm on a Zoom call is a big learning for me. And I have done not many, but certainly one a month or whatever it is. And I think that it's opened up other vistas that I would never have thought of, like doing courses. I'm a great one for adult learning. Like, I've enrolled in Oxford, enrolled somewhere else. And suddenly all these universities opened up all these free courses. I couldn't believe it. I mean, there was Harvard doing the 100 most important books, in literature. But so things like that. And I think it's been wonderful. So across the board, whether it is, look what Avid is doing. So for me, this is the most important thing as far as education is concerned. And as far as personal values are concerned, it has taught us that the only certainty at birth is death. And really, the parenthesis between birth and death is what defines a life. So we might as well live a good life, also working for the good of other people. And I don't mean that lightly. I believe in that.
Very well put, Sunita. And I'm presuming that one enduring legacy from an architecture point of view, because architecture is the mainstay of this conversation, would be what? The Rashtrapati Bhavan for you?
No. I mean, enduring legacy. My God, I have...
Modernity also, of a bridge between the past and the present into the future. I think it kind of embraces a lot of influences, no?
It does. And also the fact I've worked 5 years on the building, but I would not consider this as, if you think of what is the building I consider the most romantic, the most beautiful, I would say Fatehpur Sikri,
Oh,
So,
absolutely. that is truly beautiful. Sonali, let me come to you. Enduring legacy that you would kind of underline as an architectural piece, and enduring legacy of year 2020.
I've thought about this a lot. So I've thought about exactly what you've asked a lot during this time. And I think the legacy in my mind this year will leave is that how successfully we have called ourselves a rapidly developing nation, but forgotten all the people who are part of this development story, which are more than 60% of the people who reverse migrated. I think those images will haunt me forever, because in many ways they are my colleagues. They build alongside of me. I just do it on paper and computers and on site visits. They do it, right? And for me, the fact that as a nation we have treated them in the most deplorable way, I don't know how to not call it a crime against humanity. And it happened in my profession. So it happened close to me at home. So this is, and therefore the learning from this is that in every which way for the rest of my life, I will try to be inclusive in my profession, in whatever small impact I can. So this for me is the enduring legacy that I hope to create, an inclusive way of working. I cannot solve this country's problems, but I can even make small impacts, which I've sometimes inadvertently made, as I showed you. I intend to do it consciously every single living day of my life for the rest of my life. That is the enduring legacy I hope to leave with.
And in terms of building?
So that is the building. It will be inclusive in that way going forward from here. In terms of building, for me was a very small project, which is called the Lodzi Community Project, which actually landed up finishing in the middle of this current pandemic. And it was a production facility for Forest Essential on the top of a hill. And it's actually energy surplus building, but it has no water supply, it has no electricity supply. And it's an energy surplus building that continued to work almost through all of the lockdown, and the products are sold in over 50 countries across the world through e-commerce. So the fact that it was built by the people, for the people, and it's worked on by the people, and most of the products are made by the people from products of the hill, has just convinced me that the growth forward for this country is decentralized work. And the architecture that I fell in love with was the architecture of that building, not because I designed it, but because of the way it came together and sustained COVID.
Right.
And so it's a model for me.
Okay. I'm going to get Mohit into this conversation. Mohit, very quickly, what is the one enduring legacy building that you would say, and what is the legacy for this year?
I would say it is, acknowledgement with acceptance, and whichever way the new reality has transformed for all of us, how we embrace the new reality, and with a lot of mental toughness. I think mental toughness is very important to endure any situation, whatever it is. Yeah, we do acknowledge that everyone, the entire ecosystem is stressed, domestic and international both. However, I think it's people who are keeping the right level of emotional quotient, the right level of emotional stability, and I'm sure overall a good sense is prevailing to navigate all choppy waters. So I think
Right.
so mental toughness should be the way forward.
Okay, so that kind of brings us to the end of this discussion. I would say it has been a year of great challenges, but also great opportunities. The new normal is this, really, where distances have completely melted away, and conversations, ideas, and the effort of doing good actually gets even more strength, I think, because there's so many people working towards that. Sunita, Sonali, Mohit, and Ambassador Lago, who had to leave us a little early. Thank you for this wonderful session. I'm going to toss it back to Asad now. Asad.
Thank you. Thank you to our panel for sharing such interesting insights and visions on how we can build and conserve and pass on our culture through monuments and museums. I mean, this has been a fascinating conversation. I think 1.5 hours was too short with so many wonderful experts on the panel. But thank you to our audience. Hope you gained some interesting insights and perspectives on this fascinating topic. Kind of stay tuned for more programs in the month through Avid Online. Our next session will be on Saturday, next coming Saturday, From the Outside Looking In, the Western Perspective of India's Captivating Culture. That's on the 12th. And our last program for 2020 will be the following Saturday on Art and Aesthetics of Black and White Photography with Himanshu Seth. To find out more, just tune in to our website or follow us on social media. Until next time, stay safe, stay healthy, and remember that learning never stops. Thank you very much once again. Have a wonderful evening.
Thank you, Asad, for hosting this program. Thank you, Minnie, for being a brilliant moderator. And thank you, Sonali, Mohit, André, for your participation in this. And what a wonderful way to celebrate Kala. Yes, it did not happen at the Royal Opera House, but it yet will. I am sure.
Thank you, Sunita. Lovely connecting with you.
Pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.